Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dillan. I interview professional creators so that you can learn from their biggest mistakes and lessons, make better content, earn a gazillion dollars, do a little dance, make a little love, and get down tonight. My guest today is Daniel Vassallo. He's an ex-Amazon engineer turned indie creator and business owner, and today he's the leader of the small bets community. And as that name would suggest, everything he stands for is about taking low risk, low pressure, small bets when building something online. And he's made millions of dollars doing just that. In this episode, Daniel explains to me why go big or go home is terrible advice, how he accidentally built a community of 7,000 aspiring creators and entrepreneurs, and all the mistakes and lessons he's learned along the way. And so, if you are building something online and you want to escape this high pressure, high stakes, hustle, culture-y way of doing things that will probably burn you out, and instead make something that fuels your life and lifestyle, then you are going to get a ton out of this conversation. I certainly did. We talked for nearly 2 hours. It felt like 20 minutes to me. And with all that said, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Mr. Daniel Vassallo. So Y Combinator has launched some of the most successful startups in the world: Airbnb, Reddit, OpenAI, a bunch more. Why, Mr. Daniel, why do you hate Y Combinator? Who hurt you?
Yeah. Well, I think, they've been very effective at brainwashing people to believe that this is a good thing for them. Right? And look, Y Combinator, I don't think they're necessarily doing anything unethical. I think they've just been very effective in their marketing and convincing people that this is the best way of, especially young people, like people in their 20s, to pursue something that very likely for them as individuals is not the right course. So look, I maybe what I say looks like I'm hating them, but I'm trying to just bring to attention to other people that the deal that they're getting into is a sacrifice at the individual level for the benefit of the industry or the economy or the world, which might be true. And this is, I think, the thing that gets missed out. Something can be beneficial because this is the argument I think that YC makes, right? That they've brought so much innovation, they funded so many important things that the world is a better place because of them. And that could be true, right? But at what cost? And that the cost that comes from it is the basically spending the lives of hundreds or thousands of founders who most of them go nowhere, right? Most of them spend a decade or so of their life pursuing, sacrificing everything and ending up nowhere, which I think also, I mean, it doesn't even end there, right? Because I think, many people who take this path end up stuck in the system, right? Because they feel like they've spent a lot into something, they failed, but they still have good reputation, so they get encouraged to start something else, and then they keep trying something else, and you end up with people who started this journey at 25, now they're 40, they have nothing, they have no family, no friends, no wealth, nothing to show for, right? And they're just still grinding. This is the reality of 99 or 98 or 97% of the people who go to that program. And I think, we have to recognize that, we only have one lifetime. And even if the expected value of pursuing something like what YC promotes, at the individual level, you're likely not going to have enough chances to find individual success. So that's basically my main point, right? It's like highlighting this thing that YC doesn't highlight, right? I mean, it basically, their marketing glorifies the pursuit. I know this is a bit of a controversial analogy, but a little bit like the military way, right? Although I wouldn't necessarily say they're certainly equivalent, right? There's certainly glory and pride in serving your country for either defense or better causes. But there's the same idea, right? That you're sacrificing, you're putting yourself at harm's risk for the good of something bigger, which I would certainly appreciate a lot in the case of, of the military, or at least much better. But when it's time to, bring in a new piece of software or something else, look, and I also think they over they overemphasize. Look, they say yes, we brought Airbnb, we brought Stripe to the world or helped them happen. I'm pretty convinced that if Stripe or Airbnb didn't happen, something else might have happened. I mean, I've been doing small things on the web since before Stripe existed, and there were ways already to take credit card payments online. They were certainly not as nice and not as good as Stripe is, so this was certainly an improvement. But chances are the market would have found a way, right? So they might have accelerated things, which has value. But I think for when I speak to the individuals, mostly is like, what is it for them, right? What is YC trying to sell you, right? I mean, they want your sacrifice for that, that will help them increase the wealth of their portfolio, right? And what's good for the portfolio is not necessarily good for the individuals, and vice versa. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. Happy to dive deeper.
Oh, we certainly will, and it did make sense. And it's interesting to hear the way that you describe the things that you don't like about, as you call it, the brainwashing of something like YC. And I love how you articulated it, putting yourself at big risk, i.e., taking a very large bet, and you've created a community and sort of a lifestyle and brand of taking small bets, doing the exact opposite. I think I don't have it here in front of me, but I think the front page of Small Bets says something like, "Stop trying to build a company and just try making your first $1,000 from something from your own laptop in your house." Literally the exact opposite, taking a very, very low risk, not betting the house, not sacrificing years, certainly 15 years of your life. And so I would be curious to pivot into that. And you have a background working in Amazon, and I would love to just hear what you think your unfair advantages are that have positioned you to be a person who can build a life taking small bets and building a great life out of it.
Yeah, look, I don't know if it's an unfair advantage, but I think sort of the journey has created at least one epiphany, right? Which I did all the mistakes basically, and maybe that's my advantage. Because so I pretty traditional, I would say, more or less career in tech. I was fascinated with computers when I was little. Studied computer science, worked a couple of small companies, then got a bit of a lucky break, joined Amazon, and things were going well there. I spent almost a decade at Amazon. And, the usual climbing the ladder path that many people pursue. I think at one point, long story short, I started to realize that this is probably not the ideal path for me, even though by many metrics things were working out well. Was getting paid well, getting promoted, sort of had challenging projects, but I felt like the lack of freedom, purposeless work, bureaucracy, and so on and so forth, it started to wear me out. So I jumped into self-employment, took the plunge without anything planned. I had some savings. I thought I had a bit of time on my side, and I figured, one way or another, I'll figure out how to make things work. And my first approach was actually, I thought I was going to be bootstrapping something. I was already sort of pretty much disillusioned by the VC. I didn't want to get into another. I knew why I was leaving the corporate world, because I didn't want to have a boss. I didn't want to be beholden to someone, right? And I realized that starting a VC backed venture would pretty much put me in the same position, probably even worse, because it's even harder to leave, right? I mean, at least when I had a job, you could give your 2-week notice and see you later, right? If you're doing something like that, there's moral, maybe sometimes even contractual obligations of where you just don't just leave immediately. So I thought, I'll bootstrap a business. I thought I could fund it myself. I thought I was going to be prudent. But the big mistake I did was that I treated my first project very much like any other projects that I took on when I had a full-time job, in terms of I treated it almost like a predictable thing, right? When I was working at Amazon, the company would agree that we have some goal to launch some product, right? We discuss on how long it will take and what's the investment and so on and so forth. And then once we all agree about the goal and the target, I was good at breaking it down into little small pieces, and every day I check where me and the team is, and we collect course, and eventually hitting the goal. Right? It's sort of I got good at that, and I thought I will do the same thing with my own projects. And I think the naive part of that is that yes, sure, I might be able to get something done and build something, but will it work? Will it pay off? Will it pay off what I was expecting it to pay off? And I underestimated a lot of the uncertainty and randomness that comes with putting something on the market. The market doesn't really care how much you worked, how good you are at the thing. I mean, these things can be helpful, of course. I mean, they help, but they're not sufficient. Right? They might even be important, of course, right, to be knowledgeable about something or to put in the hard work, but certainly not sufficient. And for something to work in the market, it's a complex system of many opaque variables, like will your value proposition resonate with people? Is the pricing something that people are willing to pay for? What about the competition? What are people expecting? And things are always changing. It's very hard to know what will work and what doesn't. So, I had spent about 9 months working on this project called Userbase, which still exists, by the way. It's a sort of database as a service type of product. And I spent a lot of money out of pocket because I was getting impatient. I hired people to help me accelerate things. I did all the foolish mistakes that one tends to do in the beginning. Like I hired a security reviewer to do pen testing, spent $10,000 in security review. I hired even a lawyer. And I feel embarrassed saying this. I hired a lawyer to write my terms and conditions and privacy policy and all this silly stuff.
Cookies.
Cookies, yeah. And look, I wasn't doing anything foolishly. I was building in public. I had beta users. I was building an audience at the time. So I was getting a lot of attention. I got lots of public endorsement by highly influential people as I was building the product. And even on launch day of the product, it went really well. It was actually, talk about YC. My launch tweet got retweeted or liked by Paul Graham of YC. I was front page on Hacker News. I was number one on Product Hunt. Lots of things went well, right? So this was part of me sort of figuring out the things that I thought I could control or improve the odds for, and those worked. What didn't work was that I made about $2,000. And this wasn't even $2,000 recurring monthly, right? In the first day, like it was like $2,000 per year or something like that. And then, like after a couple of days, the sales, I mean, they didn't keep coming. And I had a bit of a small crisis of anxiety. Like, what do I do now? Do I invest another 6 months into this? And maybe, I had some runway, but it wasn't infinite, right? And I probably had already wiped maybe a fourth of it, right? And I was feeling like, time flies, and there's a very good chance here that if I spend another 6 months, another year into this, I would wipe out all my savings and I would have nothing potentially to show for that. I wasn't liking the odds. So that was when I had this epiphany where I realized, look, what I really want isn't necessarily for this project to succeed. Right? I sort of become very quickly detached from it, even though I had spent a lot of effort and money into it. But I realized what I want is like to continue to sustain this lifestyle that I have. I was certainly enjoying the self-employed lifestyle, the choosing what to work on, calling my own shots, not having to ask for permission, the freedom and independence, being sort of flexible and so on. I basically didn't want this to be taken away from me. I mean, I realized that's really my goal. It's not about the upside. It's very almost like a preservation goal, preserving what I was already living. So my mindset very much shifted almost overnight in terms of this is not about how to make the most money or how to leverage myself or scale myself or find the best opportunities, but in terms of sustaining what I'm already doing. Right? I want to be making enough money and try to tame some of the uncertainty such that this lifestyle I could continue to live indefinitely. And just that change of perspective, suddenly I started to see lots of small opportunities that weren't necessarily long term, weren't necessarily sustainable on their own indefinitely, but little things that could allow me to pay the bills, right, while continuing to be flexible, independent, maintaining my current lifestyle, and so on and so forth. And initially, to be honest with you, it's not going to be something very glamorous. Right? It was like taking small freelancing gigs here and there, nothing long term. I was basically just reaching out to people who I knew, and I'm not some super well connected person, right, but just from like ex colleagues and just friends and so on and so forth. And I was offering, depending on what they were doing, for example, I was something that worked was I offered a friend of mine who was running a startup, hey, do you want me to take some things off your backlog? This was like for $100 an hour or something like that, nothing crazy, right? Much lower hourly rate than what I was making when I was working at Amazon. But this allowed me to do 20 30 hours a month, not even a week, right? So not even part-time, like very very minimal, but enough to cover my mortgage and some of the basic things that was still leaving me with a lot of capacity for my own projects, my own freedom, and so on and so forth, right? And after I started doing that, I started seeing other opportunities. What if I try to monetize some of the knowledge that I have in my head about certain things? And I was doing these, basically I went to this period where I was thinking very short term about how can I make $5,000 next month, how can I make $10,000, that kind of thing. This wasn't about how can I make something that makes $10,000 a month, but what if I spent a weekend packaging some knowledge in my head, right? And can I make $5,000 out of that? It would be a good return on investment, right? Spending a weekend. And I had no illusions that this was going to be something that's going to continue to grow forever. What I realized was sustainable was this portfolio approach of doing things, that I could see myself continuing to adapt, doing different things, experiments, small projects that are there's still uncertainty, right? I mean, there's no recipe for success for any kind of these things, in my opinion. But it's much more, it's a level of uncertainty that's usually much more tame. That if I ask myself, what's something I can do that can make $1,000 once, right? I can very likely find some candidates that have a pretty good chance of making $1,000, which is a very different question about what's something that can make $1 million a year, right? I mean, those are way more speculative, way, way, way more speculative. And, you can certainly do things like that, right? But the odds of them materializing are harder. Or at least I think probably the best way to go after those, instead of the YC approach, right? Which, in the YC interview, they ask you, about how your idea is going to become a $10 billion business, where you literally sometimes have nothing implemented, just an idea in your head, and you're thinking about a $10 billion payoff, right? I really believe, like, if you want to, if you're ambitious and you want to aspire for something bigger, probably the most prudent way of getting there is like with these incremental small wins, I like to call them. Like there's almost like a principle. It's called the Matthew principle, right? I mean, you might have heard this. In terms of success brings with it more success. It's called the Matthew principle because in the Christian Bible, the evangelist Matthew 2,000 years ago said something like, I'm paraphrasing, those who have more will be giving, those who have not more will be taken away. That is this observation that success and sometimes even failure is sticky, right? If you succeed a little bit, more will be given. And this, usually in society is discussed as a negative thing. It leads to inequality and other problems, which I can certainly appreciate, and there's certainly some of that. But I think in business, we can take advantage of this phenomena, right? By, instead of pursuing big, ambitious things when we have nothing yet, where we'll usually fail, and then we just get the stickiness of the failure, I think we're much better off pursuing small things, small wins, the $1,000 win, which is much more likely that we find that payoff, which the goal isn't, to be satisfied with that payoff, but the goal is that, the next small win that you pursue is going to be slightly easier. And this is not just psychological thing, even though there's that as well. I'm sure you get motivated, and and it's helpful to get some wins. But I think it's the small wins create tangible assets that help you with your second, third, and fourth. You get more knowledge about what works and what doesn't, or what is more likely to work, what is less likely to work. You know more about yourself, what you're good at, what you're less good at. You build more reputation, more testimonials, more connections. Every customer that you have, it's another connection, right, that you could use for for future products, and so on and so forth, right? So every little step gets a little bit easier once you start to accumulate these small wins along the way, right? So look, I'm ambitious, right, and I still try to um, make more money and make my life better, and my family, right? But I've chosen a much more prudent path, in my opinion, that is, I also believe, it's much more conducive, right, to the success that I'm trying to pursue, compared to the go big or go home, which usually leads to going home, right? Uh, so yeah, hope that sort of clarifies a little bit, right? The sort of how I see it.
I love it. Lots of things come to mind. First, on the YC bit, I had friends who, interviewed at YC, and they were building a meal planning company, and they were exactly in that situation. They were asked, "Okay, take us from where you are now to $1 billion," and they were like, "We're just trying to pay our rent first."
Yes. Yes.
How do we? Can you help us get that so I can stop doing Uber throughout the days?
Right.
And then hearing it's so fascinating to hear this perspective, because I'm an Alex Hormozy fan. He's gotten he's given me a ton of insight and helped shape a lot of the ways in which I approach and take action toward my business. I know you called him out on Twitter one time, which was quite funny. But
Did I? I forgot that. It might have been something about lifestyle or whatever. Yeah, maybe.
Sure, that's usually what people call him out for.
Yeah.
But I did get this urge to build something and scale it, and I have experienced and do experience the sometimes pressure that comes with that, the stress that comes with that. We've been bootstrapped all the way. I've never wanted to take any sort of investing, certainly from a VC. I have this like image in my head that there's a shark from Shark Tank who would just give me money and then be breathing down my neck the whole time. And so I have approached it as this, like, if this gets big, that would be really cool. That would be really fascinating. Though I do feel, at least me personally, there's in some in-between spot where the goal is big, but we have been taking it at very, very tiny chunks, almost small bets at a time, starting with like, can we just help one person do a thing? Okay. Could we help 5 people do a thing? Can we help them do it for free? And then can they give us testimonials? And then are they referring other people? So we've been almost at a snail's pace. But at that snail's pace have come quite a long way over the last year, right? And I had a point there. What was my main point? All the while, if this thing were to fail or blow up, or it's just too hard and we give up, I'm working with a small team. The whole goal and the way that we've structured it is that, and what I've heard from everything that you've shared is like, whatever it is that you're working on, if it fails, if the worst case scenario is this thing dies, we want that worst case scenario to just not be that bad. We're still safe. It's not going to ruin any lives. We have some other thing to turn to. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. That's the avoiding ruin is the goal, and this is and ruin here is a bit almost metaphorical, right? Because most people are not going to get ruined ending up homeless on the street, right? So for me, the game over state, even though again, to many people this is going to sound like not a big deal, but for me the game over state is like having to go back to a full-time career, full-time job. It's not because, again, like there's anything wrong with it, but I think as a compatibility for me, I realize, I want that chapter to be closed. I really don't want to go back there, right? So I'm trying to make decisions such that I avoid that outcome almost at all costs, right? I basically, and again, like I don't also want to do something that might not be technically full-time but feels like a full-time work, right? So the reason is not really because I want the label, I want to avoid the label, right? But I want once again that having to be 9 to 5, beholden to someone, working on somebody else's terms, and so on and so forth, which is why I compared VC-backed businesses with full-time work, right? Because sort of you're still mostly in the same situation. So it's probably the most important factor in the selection criteria. Is this thing going to be, increasing my chance of ruin, quote unquote? And sometimes ruin is also psychological, right? I think many people who end up in this game over status, they get discouraged, which I think is another underrated effect of the go big or go home approach, is that I don't know, no matter I think how much willpower you have and how much discipline, if you're taking something very ambitious, you spend a year working on something and it fails, and you try again another year and you fail again. I mean, I think even if you're the most willpowered person, probably at some point you're going to become discouraged, right? I mean, this is just hard to continue to stand up again and try the same thing. And if you don't get discouraged, you probably run out of time, right? Because there aren't a lot of 1 year periods in a lifetime. So yeah, absolutely. I think things need to feel this. And by the way, this is very well understood. These are very well understood principles in financial investing, right? In terms of never investing more than you can tolerate losing, right? Sort of having a diversified portfolio, because you can never really know, even if you're bullish on something, right? Things change all the time, right? And not over leveraging yourself, because if there's a downside, you can get wiped out and you get ruined. So we know these from finance. I tried and true strategies of hedging and diversifying and so on and so forth, because we understand the uncertainty. And I really think, right, when you're doing our own projects, we're investing as well. Might not investing capital, but at least we're investing our time. And sometimes capital as well, right? But for most people who are maybe solopreneurs, self-employed, the biggest investment is that we get 24 hours every single day, right? And we choose to invest them between what remains as spare time to work. If it's 8 hours, how do I spend those 8 hours, right? And they're as scarce, time is as scarce and as precious as money. And the payoffs are uncertain. If the payoffs are certain, things are easy. Would be printing money, right? But they're not, right? So we have to apply the same diligence, I think, as when we're investing in the stock market or in crypto or in real estate or combination of those things. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cost of the downside cost. Basically, it's like, taking care of the downside and letting the upside take care of itself is, maybe you could summarize what you described, and I would say what I try to implement as well.
What has woodworking taught you about creating stuff online?
It taught me about what I like to call, philosophically, the dose-response relationship of things. Right? I mean, this is something that I learned recently, right? That about me and about my preferences. I used to think, like many people think, that, for example, I like programming, or I like writing, or I like, even in just, I like coffee or whatever. Colloquially, we talk in these terms, right? That's what we say when someone asks us about our preferences. But I realized that many of these things come with a constraint of dose and frequency, intensity, and so on and so forth. Like, for example, I like writing online, but my preferred form of writing is a concise form. I realize that I don't like long, I'm probably not good at writing a 500-page book, right? But a tweet is perfect. And maybe not, the tweet is maybe even more extreme, right? I mean, maybe it's a more because sometimes I feel like I want to write a bit more. And same thing with programming, right? This is something interesting, right, that I realized because I've been tinkering with computers since I was a kid and writing my own software and games and so on and so forth. When I was just doing it for its own sake, and after I started, doing programming as part of my career, part of my job, the amount of enjoyment and satisfaction I got from that activity, it was never the same. And I think part of the reason was that I was trying to do it at a dose and frequency that wasn't the ideal combination for me, where my employer was forcing me, quote unquote, again, like, and sort of doing it 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, week after week, where I think I enjoyed doing that much more in bursts and valleys and rest periods. That's where I might go deep and big spike, and then sort of wander around a little bit until sort of the inspiration comes, which is very hard to do in a work arrangement, a traditional work arrangement, which, not blaming anyone, I understand would be very hard to manage employees who are unpredictable like that. And I bring the the analogy with liking coffee, for example, because colloquially we say I like coffee, but what does it really mean? Does it mean that I like to drink a gallon of coffee in one go? Probably not. And is it a drop of coffee? Also probably would be very unsatisfying. That there's a dose and the frequency. Like if I were to take, the dose is probably a cup of coffee, and the frequency is maybe 2-3 times a day. Like if I were to take a cup of coffee every 5 minutes, probably it would put me off coffee. Right? If I were to take a huge dose of coffee, it probably would harm me in some way. Right? A small drop would not harm me, but would be unsatisfying. Right? I feel I want more. So there's that optimal dose and frequency. And woodworking taught me a lot about it. Because the woodworking was what made me reflect a lot on this, because I started woodworking during the pandemic when all of us had lots of free time and so on and so forth. Like many people picked up new hobbies, I got fascinated with it. I was really enjoying it, and probably one of the first mistakes I did in the beginning was like I treated it like I treated, say, programming or the more type of intellectual work where if I'm writing if I'm creating some software, like doing programming, I would like zone in and lose concept of time, and sometimes end up like at 5 a.m. in the morning until I finish whatever I planned to start. And that seems to be the most effective way for me to work, even if I were to take 3 days off later. But if it's in me, I want to put it out. It's always been my way of working. But with woodworking, I try to do the same, and it burnt me out. Right? Being in the workshop until 5 a.m. in the morning with all the lights on, the machines, the noise, the dust, and whatever.
Sounds dangerous.
Yeah, it's probably dangerous, and I realized it's not enjoyable to work that way. And then I took it to the other extreme, where I was doing, what is not working? What if I do like 30 minutes a day, or something like that, or 1 hour a day? And that also wasn't enjoyable, because then I was losing track of what I was doing. Like I was doing this dining table once, and I did the top, and I was finishing the top, and so on and so forth, and it just kept getting dragged forever and ever, and I lost interest, and this thing never got completed. So I started to realize that I need some different arrangement. It can't be this high spike of high intensity, the high dose, the equivalent of taking a gallon of coffee. It can't be the drop. It has to be some other arrangement. And I started to subconsciously find the arrangement that worked, right? Which is much, maybe, burst in 2-3 hours, right? But then I would want to stop, turn off the lights, and that's it for the day. But I also wanted to have projects that I could complete in less than a week. Otherwise, I start to lose interest, or at least I need to break them down into concrete things. So it made me reflect a lot on my own preferences and how I create things. And I think this is part of where we're all different, right? I think everyone has their own different sort of dose, frequency, preference for every different activity. And this goes back to probably why full-time work wasn't a good fit for me because it really didn't allow me to experiment with my dose and frequency. There was this expectation that the dose and frequency was 40 hours a week, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, week after week, and so on and so forth. I couldn't really get out of that. Even if I changed companies, changed teams, there was that expectation of the consistent slog, that I like to call it, right, where you're just doing something spread over time, and I couldn't really change it. So I highly encourage people, if they can, like to try to discover what is the optimal dose and frequency, because for the things that they're doing, because if you change those things, something that you like doing might very easily become unpleasant, or vice versa, right? You might think something is unpleasant, but it turns out that if you do it at a different dose and frequency, it becomes pleasant again. Just for example, writing, right? I think writing for me it's become very pleasant when it's very concise, or like on X, on Twitter, like I'm almost writing headlines, right? I'm not even writing content. It's just my thoughts expressed as headlines, which of course isn't sufficient to cover everything, right? But it's a form that I really enjoy doing. And it's a personal preference. Not everyone is the same. I see people writing weekly newsletters that are incredibly long, and I feel like I would never be able to do this, right? It's not just the skill, but I think it's just the preference. Right? Writing on a schedule, for example, it's something that one of the reasons why I never really started a regular newsletter, because I think I would dislike knowing that I have to write something every Friday, for example. And that's just a personal thing, right? Again, some people actually love that they have a structure, and it gives them a bit of accountability, right? And that makes them tick, makes them function. So, yeah, I know it's a bit philosophical. That's probably one of the things that I think made me realize about creation and productivity in general.
I love this language around frequency and dose, right? I love coffee. I drink coffee every day, but I can only do 1, maybe sometimes 2 cups in a day.
Yeah.
But that also doesn't mean I can just wait 6 days and on the 7th day have 7 cups of coffee.
Exactly.
I would probably go to the hospital.
Yes. Which, by the way, this concept comes from medicine, that which we all know. That medicine also, every prescription comes with a dose and frequency. That your doctor never tells you, "Hey, take aspirin as much as you want." Right? It's like take 20 milligrams twice a day, because we understand from medicine, right, that very low dose it might not even be absorbed. High dose it can kill you. There's the optimal curve, right? So the research in medicine is always like this, finding the right dose for every different type of drug, right? So it's a concept, right, that we taking from a different domain and sort of applying it to other things.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Steph Smith said something similar on this topic. She said, when I'm inspired and deeply excited about something, I could effortlessly sit and work 16 hours straight on that thing. But I can never, ever, ever force myself to work 16 hours on a thing. It just will never work. On those days, I would have gotten more done if I just stuck to 1 hour of work, 1/16th, the thing I thought I would do. And this is selfishly very good timing, because this is sort of what I'm working out in my own workflow and schedule for the time being. I noticed that I took some time off in December. I was finishing my long stint of travel, like 2 years of travel, and I came back to the US. So I just basically took December off. And it was wonderful, very necessary. But I came back and I had a very cliche, almost self-help productivity moment of my task list and my to-do list was, it almost made me like emotional. I was like, there's just no physical way I could get to all of this. And I was so overwhelmed by the things I had to get done. I would have multiple things in a day to do, and I would just put it off. I would just procrastinate most of it. And so this figuring out of what is my ideal, I've been calling it workflow, but basically what when it comes to deep work, things that would be really useful to get done, or dare I say should get done,
Mhm.
What is the dose and frequency of my deep work? Because if I load my days up,
Yeah.
the evidence shows,
Mhm.
just like firing myself up and maybe shaming myself into just sucking it up and doing it, the evidence shows that has not worked. And so what I've been doing lately is picking just one thing. What's his name? Gary Keller. He wrote The One Thing, just picking one intention, one main major thing to get done each day. And that has been significantly more useful for me. But even still,
Mhm.
saying, all right, on this day, I will do deep work from this hour to this hour, this 3 hour time block. There are still
Yeah.
days where I'm just like, I hit that time and I sit and I'm like, I rebel against it. I'm like, no, I don't want to do this right now. This is
Mhm.
not. And so I will find other things to do. And anyway, figuring out, I just really, that's very useful language, the
Yeah.
dose and frequency. I like that.
It's interesting that because I also started to make a distinction between the high motivation tasks, like the ones Steph Smith mentioned, right, and the low motivation tasks, like the boring things, that which we all have to do, the bookkeeping, the dealing with, accounting and whatever, right, um, and I discovered also in terms of dose and frequency, right, that at one point I experimented trying to do a little bit every day of these annoying tasks, and to try to spread it out again, to not get overwhelmed at the end of the month or quarter or whatever, right? Um, but again, this is just personal preferences, right? It's just with me experimentation, not necessarily saying this is the right thing for everyone. But I realized for me, I'm much I it seems much more preferable, right, to bunch them up all in one go and have a dedicated boring day at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, because it's like to me it feels like there's a pain threshold right, that once you're just doing painful annoying things, you can't get more pain right, whereas if I sprinkle it throughout all my days, right,
Hmm.
it's like it ruins a little bit every little day with, oh man, I have to do that thing today, and so on and so forth, right? And this can't be applied to everything. There are some things, maybe customer support and dealing with emails, that I can't just bunch up at the end of the month or whatever. I have to do a little bit of the day, but as much as I can, um, I've been intentionally, right, leaving things. And yes, it looks overwhelming to me, right? But to me, then sort of I actually, it's also a little bit satisfying, right? To strike off a lot of things at once. But I think the primary thing is that I like to keep as many days as possible pain free. Right? I like this feeling of waking up in the morning and say, I just have options in front of me. What do I do? Right? Without feeling like I have to do things that are must do's or important things, but I'm not really motivated to do. So I bring this up as an example. Again, not saying this is how everyone should work, but it's like another realization where once I got the flexibility of deciding how I work, as I was experimenting with things, I discovered that this was a much better way for me
Hmm.
to function.
Yeah, the Navy SEALs have Hell Week. Daniel Vassallo has
Yes,
Hell Day.
basically, yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe there's maybe it's same reasons.
um, I I like that framing. I think what makes it challenging, or sort of as I hear what you just laid out, what is challenging, at least for me, and again, I'm just speaking from my own
Mhm.
personal experience, and we coach creators all the time. So the reason that we exist is because doing our work
Mhm.
is often hard, or sticking to a particular dose and frequency is often hard, and so it's having regular accountability to make sure that you're doing the things that you say you want to do and that you're moving in the right direction. And I think what is hard is, what I find is, what I think is boring, or high motivation, low motivation often
Mhm.
changes. Like,
Mhm.
it's not just this blanket thing that's boring and sucks. It's like, well, sometimes when I'm in the mood, I love
Mhm.
admin stuff. I love
Yeah.
organizing stuff. I love doing
True.
this. Don't tell anybody, Daniel, but I love like
Mhm.
doing my taxes sometimes, just
Mhm. Yeah.
organizing
Yeah. I
everything
understand.
yeah, it's quite
Yeah.
fun. But then other days I'm like, this is the last thing I want to do. And so I think that
Mhm.
fluctuation is another key component that makes it at least hard for me. So what do you say to that? Please fix me, Daniel.
Yeah. I don't have the answer, but I think part of it is um, I think our subconscious is always trying to guide us away from doing purposeless things. Like probably in terms of evolutionary survival instincts, that we've developed this, this desire to avoid taking unnecessary risk and expending energy for no reason. So I tend to find, generally speaking, that things become a bit enjoyable when once I feel that they are consequential. Like doing my taxes, I think feels much more enjoyable when I'm closer to the deadline because I know that the consequence of not doing them are going to be incredibly bad. I mean, very annoying, penalties, whatever. More, I have to do it anyway eventually. So knowing that this suddenly became urgent and important, it seems to activate something in my brain that suddenly, and like you, that I don't mind this work. I Let me give you an example. Right? So, for example, I'm working with a bookkeeper, and the bookkeeper is always pushing me every month, right, to give them my financial statements, whatever. And there are some things that they can't do themselves for technical reasons, right? So I have to download some PDFs and send them to them, and I really hate this. And because I feel like it's unnecessary, it's not giving me any value. This is to help the bookkeeper themselves, not accumulate a lot of work at the end, right? So I do it just because they keep shouting at me to do it, right? And probably if I don't do it, they will fire me, right? But I really dislike it, right? Um, but if yeah because I'm not convinced it's important. If I were doing my own bookkeeping, because again, like, I don't have a lot of transactions, right? I mean, I'm running a small business with maybe 50 transactions a month or something like that. Like my accounts could certainly be done in a day, right? It could be just very close to the deadline, and then you say, I'm going to download everything, go to categorize everything, and you're done. So I've been almost like using procrastination sometimes as a indicator, right? That's maybe what I'm trying to do. I'm not convinced yet that this is important, right? And then it sort of I use it as a bit of a guide. Like, do I even need to do this thing? Right? Sometimes I start to wonder, or sometimes I convince myself. Right? I convince myself, well, actually, this is important, right? And then I get a little bit of that internal drive, right, to do it, and with it you get some joy or satisfaction or some positive hormone gets released while you're doing it. So I don't know if this explains everything or is this sufficient for every situation, but it's a process that I try to do, again, like to help drive me do the things that are sometimes boring, sometimes not.
For sure. And I will be waiting on Twitter to see if some accountant or financial freelancer is tweeting at you, demanding and screaming. So basically, since you've left Amazon, you have been glamorously unemployed. Is sort of the vibe that I've been getting. No. Yeah. When I started traveling, I've just been saying that I've been glamorously homeless, and that's certainly how it's felt.
Yes. Yep. Unemployable is the term that we like to use. That is not just unemployed, but I've burnt all the boats.
It certainly feels that way. It's hard to imagine
psychologically. Yes, I don't think I did. I said probably I might not go to Amazon, but I think if I really wanted to, I could probably find employment. So I don't think I've literally burned the boats, but I like to feel that psychologically I close that chapter, right? So because I think there's something also insidious and relying too much on the safety net. I know a lot of people who jumped into a path like I did, but they're always like, oh, if it doesn't work out, I could always go back to my employer or find a job again. And I think many people who go with that attitude end up going there. It's again, like, this is like walking on the tightrope with the safety net under you.
Yeah.
You're going to be imprudent because you're going to get caught. Right? But if you mentally burn the bridges, I think you just have much more skin in the game. That you just that this has to succeed. You're just fooling around and playing around, right? So, it's another interesting way of looking at things.
100%, man. I come from a life coaching background, just coaching people one-on-one. That was the first business that I really started. That's how I jumped my career. And I came up in this certification program, and then eventually I became a leader in that program. And over the years, I've been helping and training other people who want to start and grow life coaching businesses. And it's actually, you know, in my experience of working with probably hundreds, under 500 coaches, it's not, you know, 20 something year old dudes trying to build a coaching business. The majority of people who get into life coaching are like 50-year-old women who are not the breadwinners and want to do something fun and earn some money on the side and contribute to a household. And in my experience, what I have seen, not just with 50-year-old women, but people on this pursuit in the first place, is those who don't actually need to make money, I have seen struggle significantly more than those like myself who, oh my God, I need this to start working so I can pay my rent next month, right? I mean, the opposite of a small bet, but oh my God, I learned and took more action than I ever have. I have the ultimate incentive. I don't want to get evicted from my apartment. It's either learn how to make this profitable and sustainable, or yes, I wasn't going to be homeless. I could have gone back to waiting tables at the Cheesecake Factory. I had plenty, you know, family members and friends who would have housed me. Like it wouldn't have been that dire, but emotionally it felt that way. Certainly it felt like, oh my God, I've failed. I've completely failed. I would have been embarrassed. So you're damn right. I was reaching out to 20, 30 people every single week. I was on calls constantly. I worked on weekends, and it worked. Lo and behold, it worked.
Yeah. No, it completely makes sense. And I think, you know, to some degree, that's what I felt as well. Right, I wasn't close to running at the end, right? But it's the stressor that made me realize, even though, again, like I wasn't about to miss the mortgage or miss rent or whatever, but I realized that the path that I was on, right, at some point, right, that's what's going to be the case, and I would have to go back to an arrangement that I didn't like, and that's what made me think, yeah, I need to start making money. I need to start paying the bills. I need to cover the expenses, and yeah, it's incredible how important that is to you know, see good opportunities and take good risks. Like it's very, or I should probably say, it's very hard to find success, right? Unless you get into that state of mind, whether it's actually real or whether it's, you know, you use some mental tricks, right, to create a sense of urgency.
Yeah. I've heard several people say that use what you got. So if at the beginning you're driven by fear, anxiety, you know, like I said, I was driven by anxiety. I didn't want to get evicted from my apartment. I think, I don't know if you've heard this, but I certainly in the coaching space, like the self-improvement space, I've heard people bash that, say like, no, like you have to be driven by something. Your why has to be this beautiful, positive thing. And it's just like, dude, I'm terrified. I need to make money. I don't want to get evicted. It's like, if that gets me to do the thing, how can that be a bad thing? And I think, again, in my own personal experience, the goal is to eventually change that, right? That's not going to get you probably to where you want to go 10 years from now, once you, you know, are consistently making money. Like fear can only take you so far, but at least in the beginning, it's like, yeah, use what you've got, use what motivates you.
100%. And anxiety, unfortunately, in the modern world, we try to hide it under the rug and sort of suppress it. But I really think it's a great motivator. It's probably there for a reason. I don't think it's a bug in our brains. It's there to probably our ancestors, right? They were probably anxious by other things, physical harm, and probably also, you know, shelter and so on. And I think it's our subconscious noticing things that are risky and consequential and trying to guide us to a place that is less so. So, of course, chronic anxiety can become problematic, and maybe that needs to be treated, because it can go haywire. I'm not diminishing that case, but I think the kind of acute anxiety of, I need to correct course, I think we should listen to it, right? And rather than just trying to, ignore it, which is unfortunately what I see a lot of, people try to do or recommend to other people doing.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the reason I run this podcast is because I don't want to get mauled by a lion somewhere deep down. It's got to be there.
It's I got a lot of inspiration from the preppers, the survivalists about this. Right? I mean, when I moved to the Seattle area, it was the first time in my life that I met a few actual people who really worry about. We're in a bit of a natural disaster zone here. We're surrounded by 5 active volcanoes, 2 major earthquake faults, wildfires every summer, tsunami threat from the Pacific Ocean, floods, lots of rain. Lots of things can happen here. So I got to meet in some people that if you have any bit of paranoia, right? I mean, you're in the right place. And initially, I thought stereotypically, oh, these people are just paranoid, right? And they're somewhat crazy. But I started to realize as I got to meet a few people that actually these are people who take action on their anxiety. Yes, they might be anxious that there's going to be some major earthquake and disconnects them from civilization for 2 years. And instead of just worrying about it, they're actually doing something. They're hoarding things and preparing their bunker and whatever they think, even if their fear seems irrational, right? That it's like very low odds and so on and so forth. It doesn't really matter, right? They're just dealing with their anxiety and they're living probably with much stronger, much better peace of mind than most other things. So I found that as a very helpful attitude to lots of things in life and business, right? And sort of we're always prepping for something, whether it's like what's working in my business today might not work tomorrow, right? Whether it's competition, whether it's market disruptions, and so on and so forth, right? So, and sometimes, this prepping mindset, with the preppers, it's commonly said like that you might be prepping for an earthquake, but then something else happens completely different that maybe you didn't expect. I mean, the pandemic was a good example, right? I mean, all the preppers around me who were prepping, they had masks and whatever for wildfire prepping. When the pandemic came and there was scarcity of all things, right? I mean, they had already whatever they needed, even though they weren't even thinking of a pandemic. So there's this mindset, the prepper mindset, I think, that you realize you're not good at predicting what will happen. That the future is uncertain, but the only thing you can really control is preparing for the worst case scenarios, preparing how to be resilient, and so on and so forth. Right? So, look, I think anxiety and things like it can be very helpful guides and stressors, right, to sort of put us in a much more resilient and robust state. So glad we're talking about it.
Can I ask you about the small bets community?
Yeah, of course.
So as of today, you guys are at 6,738 members. And to get meta for a second, I can only assume that building the small bets community was itself a small bet for you. Yeah. But I'm always curious as to the barrier to entry or what the initial checklist is. Okay, the small bets community is in existence. It is live. I'm going to tell people about it. What was the checklist? All right, I at the very least, I need these things to make this thing viable before I launch it.
Well, it's interesting because it wasn't even the plan to start a community, right? So actually, and this is also an example of how much uncertainty plays a role in what works and what doesn't. So this started as a 2-week cohort course, live course. This started in October 2021, so about 3 years and a bit ago, where I was basically I realized, but from my posts online, right, that some people were finding these strategies interesting about how to deal with portfolios of small projects and diversifying and so on and so forth. And I was trying to be helpful, explaining to people online everything that I learned and figured out and along the way. And I was noticing the signal that there was interest. So I considered actually creating a traditional info product at first, like writing a book or doing a recorded video course. But again, I kept procrastinating. I just felt like the medium, like of writing or a recorded course, wasn't probably the right thing for what I was thinking. But I had a lot to say, right? Much more, certainly much more than what I could answer people in comments and in DMs. So back then, cohort courses became a bit of a thing. This was 2021. They were becoming very popular. And I was initially reluctant to try cohort courses because I would have to be live there, put things on my calendar, which I wanted to try to avoid at the time. And actually, as a learner myself, I always considered myself to be more self-directed than structured, right? I certainly learned a lot more from books and reading on my own rather than from school and the places where I had to be there at 10 a.m. in the morning, right? So I started with a bit of like that, that idea that it's probably not something I like, but I got convinced, and I got convinced actually by participating in cohort courses as a member, as a student, right? And I actually started to enjoy the experience, the bit of community that was forming in those places, even though there wasn't a well-defined community, there wasn't a place or whatever, but you start to recognize people. We're in the same Zoom room, right? And we started to get to know each other. So long story short, I started this cohort course called A Portfolio of Small Bets. In fact, initially, that's what I called it. And this was 2 weeks, 6 sessions on Zoom, 90 minutes each, where I had on every session, we went into one of these topics in terms of how to find ideas for your project, how to choose what to work on and what to avoid, how to diversify. There was a bit of little small topics like the dose-response relationship that we talked about earlier. There's a collection of all the things that I sort of felt they were helpful for me in taming the uncertainty of self-employment. Yeah, sorry.
How many people were in this cohort?
So I was doing groups. I started with 25 people. So I was taking 25 seats per group. I think after the 4th cohort, I increased it to 35. I wanted to keep it small to have a high level of interaction. And then I experimented with 35 and it was still working well. And long story short, I was doing these one after each other. I finished a cohort and I started another one immediately. And there was no, on my landing page, if you were to go back into way back archive, there's no mention of community at all. This was just a course. My idea was that people go to it, it finishes, that's it, right? It's over. So I was charging $375. It wasn't very expensive compared to some other courses. 2 weeks, 6 sessions, 25 people, and then I increased it to 35, right? And I enjoy doing this a lot. I would probably have continued to do it indefinitely, but like many other things, eventually after the 12th cohort, so I did this for 6 months, I started to realize that it's becoming increasingly harder to fill another 35 people from my audience, right? Like the first 4 cohorts, I pretty much filled them up in 24 hours. The 5th took maybe a week. The 6th took a couple of weeks. And by the 12th time, I was like, maybe I won't even fill 35 seats for the next one. It's just, the pipeline was diminishing a little bit, or maybe my audience wasn't going fast enough to be a good enough top of the funnel. So as a way to adapt, I thought, and this was actually a bit of feedback. Right? So because in the meantime, we had set up a Discord server because people who took the course were asking me, is there a place where we can share notes, where we can talk about things and so on and so forth. And I started the Discord server very much on a whim without thinking much about it. I wasn't even logging into it myself. Right? I just started it. I told people about it and it was there. But I started to get feedback that people were really enjoying what was happening in the group chat there. And some people are telling me, look, I joined for the course, but this group chat here is much more fascinating. And I started to realize some people were, doing collaborations together, starting podcasts together. A couple of people started businesses, right,
Cool.
and meetups and so on and so forth. So I thought, wow, interesting. Maybe this should be the product. I got the stressor from seeing the struggle with filling the cohort courses. And I thought, okay, what if I, instead of selling a cohort course, I sell this as a community, right? And I didn't want to stop doing my course because I think I still thought it was valuable, but I wanted to change how I did. Because one of the challenges with cohort courses when you try to book people on a particular date, I mean, it's people need to be available on those times and dates as well. So time zones, and people have life things and so on. So I thought, what if I pretty much keep the same product as I had, but I just position it differently. So instead of people paying $275 to sign up for cohort 12, which is going to run February 1st to February 15th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, they would immediately join the small bets community. And then I do the course once every month, and anyone who's in the community can join, right? So, if you're available, you can join. You can even join multiple times, and so on and so forth. And this really worked, right? So I sent out an email to everyone who ever bought something from me. I posted something on Twitter, and there's a clear inflection point in my sales from that point onwards. I think it became a much better value proposition because I think there was instant gratification. I eliminated this friction point of, well, are you available on February 1st to February 15th? People can just join, and they have the option to join the course whenever they want. But the main value in my head was still the course, right? That was the main thing I was delivering. The community, the group chat was just something, that is just there, right? So I continued to do this, and I started to feel like this was really working in terms of sales, but I was feeling a little bit like that I was probably under delivering a little bit, because I was hyping it up as a community, right? But in reality, what was really my product was still this 2-week course that I was doing. The community, the group chat was still, it was active. There were 10, 15 messages a day, but it wasn't anything radical that I didn't think it justified the price. And I wanted people to feel satisfied, of course, right? I mean, I was relying on word of mouth, and I wanted to deliver a good product. So soon after, what I started to do was I started inviting other people to do classes, right? So instead of just me doing my own course, I tried very gradually, bringing in people who had expertise in other things, all sorts of different things, from how to start a YouTube channel to how do you do your own taxes, and how to sort of do search engine optimization and buying domains and investing and things and so on and so forth. Like lots of different topics that are, the common theme is mostly self-employment and solopreneurship. And for a long time, this was the core value. This was the core proposition. So you join, you still pay a one-time fee, and there's this menu of live classes by other people. So I just became one of the 12 people who were hosting things, right? And almost every week we used to have something different. Almost every week there's a different class that you join live on Zoom, and we repeat it maybe every 3, 4, 5 months, usually in different times, so that we cater to people in different time zones. And this became the main product for a very long time. But even this, starting probably mid 2024, the interest started to diminish. And I think this was also part of the post-COVID Zoom fatigue, I like to call it, that fewer people wanted to be on Zoom meetings. They're probably all Zoom meetings every single day, right? And the attendances started to diminish. So now I've doubled down even more so on the group chat part. Now it's much different, right? We have sort of resident experts there, right? I mean, where the activity rate is much higher. There's many days we cross over 1,000 messages a day in the group chat, and this sort of became once again became like the main thing, right? There's still other things that I'm experimenting with. So I bring this up because it's an interesting, I think, story for. I didn't design things to be the way they are today. It was very much an adaptation, right? With what was working, dropping what wasn't, adapting, and destiny took its course. I wasn't trying to start a community. The thing that I had in my mind 3 years ago was certainly very different than what is today. And if I were to put a comment, maybe which was maybe to your probably to try to answer your question, I think starting communities is really hard, right? I think and if I were to go back in time and try to do it again, maybe there's a very good chance I won't succeed, because I really think there's like this of course this chicken and egg problem, right, which is a common issue with communities, where if you're starting one and there's no one, that is very hard to get people excited about it. So I think I was very lucky that I started something else. That was the thing that brought people together, and then they just had a place to communicate, to mingle with each other. But I think I was also very lucky that maybe the first few groups of people who I brought together happened to be the kind of people who continue to come back, bring in links and ask for feedback and help each other and so on. So you almost need like this initial spark in the beginning to happen. That's very hard to engineer. And then if anything, I just haven't let the fire get extinguished yet, right? And maybe again, this is one of these things that I feel like, one day it might get extinguished, and then it dies or disappears. It certainly can happen, probably will happen eventually. But yeah, like I think if I were to offer any tips for anyone trying to start a community, probably I would suggest do something else, right? And let the community form almost as a side effect of it. And something else could be like either a course like I did, or maybe organize a meetup or some other kind of event or a series of events which gets people together. And I think initially it could be just something as a WhatsApp group or something very scrappy that just allows people to continue to interact. And then you can play it by ear. That you can evolve, move to a different platform, maybe start inviting other people, maybe start charging money for people to join, and so on and so forth. Right? But I really think it's a much more organic thing. Many of the creators that I've seen trying to create a community from scratch, unless they had some massively huge audience, like millions of followers, whatever, usually it's very hard. And actually, even people with huge audiences, I think, and by the way, actually, I did try to do this myself. Before the Small Best community, I had another community. This was called Profit and Loss, where the idea was to sort of have a bit of a, community of, again, self-employed people to talk about financial opportunities, finance, and sharing our income streams and so on. And I get this effect where when newsletters got a lot of attention for like 2-3 days, and then it died a very, very quick death, because it was very hard to get people to remember that they're part of this thing, to build that habit. So I think probably the best way to try to improve the odds is to have some other thing that brings people together, right? And the community is just the side dish to whatever else you're trying to do, and then you play it by ear. So yeah, hope that helps illustrate a little bit about how this happened.
Yeah, it definitely does. It's really cool to see or to hear the arc. And it reminds me of the corridor theory. I don't know if you've heard that. Marcus Jones talks. Yeah, where you don't know, you just can't possibly know what's in the next corridor until you open the door and walk through it, and that will just take you to whatever the next corridor is, and so on and so forth. Like no amount of planning or prepping years ago would have even conceived whatever the Small Bets community is right now. And I also have experience trying to put a community together, and experienced all the woes. I think from both ends, like having absolutely nothing in the beginning, and so nobody talks. It's just like you're kind of a weirdo if you are the one who talks. Like there's nobody here, so it's like, what am I? I'm just going to be you're almost like a try hard in gym class. It's like, all right, I will to no one share something valuable or ask questions, and then on the other end, once we had a free community on school for content creators, no niche. This was this was when we were just figuring, like, what the hell are we doing? What do we even sell?
Mhm.
And we just invited people. It was completely for free. And we had like 300, not nearly as many as are in small bets, but yeah, 300 in a few months. And so it was the exact opposite problem, where now everyone's posting all the time, but there's no commitment, there's no real and there's bots, and so it
There's
was
no skin in the game. Like there's no,
exactly,
there's lots of spam presumably, like, and nonsense.
and lots of posts and no responses to those posts, because nobody cares. Nobody cares at all. And
there's nothing
you're
for me, basically.
right. And so you mentioned a few things that I want to highlight here as we come to the tail end of this conversation, but you've highlighted a one-time fee for the community. You've emphasized actually not having the intention of building a paid community, but instead building something else that is helpful and valuable to a group of people, and then as a byproduct, having a community. I'm curious as to our clients are creators, and we help them monetize, make their own small bets, if you would. And one of the options that comes up a lot, particularly with gamers and streamers, is creating a paid community for the true fans and giving them more access, more, different types of content, whatever, but a paid community. And so I'm curious, what else comes to mind as far as absolute fundamental tenets if you want to have a successful paid community? What is a non-negotiable? What has to exist?
It's you actually brought up the point, right? That is very important, right? Where people were asking questions and nobody answering because there's no skin in the game, there's no incentive. It's like trying to figure out what is it for people, right? To be active. And usually, I think, well, at least for the kinds of communities that I've been in and they've sort of managed, it's a form of reputation building. That you start to realize that people want to. They open the chat every day and they check in what's happening because they feel like they've made connections. I had members in my community, do the math on how much money they made per messages they posted. Right? And it's a bit of a weird thing because every month I post this leaderboard. It's a bit of a fun thing, leaderboard of top chatters. So everyone gets to know how much they posted. And some people figured out that they've found lots of clients, for example, because they've been building a reputation of being, say, I'm an SEO expert, right? And I'm just helping people with all the SEO questions, right? So then people hover over their profile and they find that they offer consulting or freelancing or so on and so forth. And they have some package, and they told them, the clients told them, I found you from the small bets chat, right? And they attribute the sale to that. And this is, of course, very, when there's money involved, it's easier to calculate. Sometimes it's a bit more of a gut feel, right? You start to feel that other people start to recognize you. It's a form of audience building that's a bit different than what happens in the public social networks. But you build a name for yourself in a smaller circle, which has pros and cons. Of course, the scale is smaller. You're not going to go viral and be seen by, Elon Musk or whatever. That's when in a small group. But again, you're probably much more likely to be able to build a name for yourself if you're there trying to help people all the time. And I don't know, like, if this applies to everything, where like with gaming or with other things, right? But it is, I think, you need to discover what is it for the members, right, to be helpful, to contribute back. And sometimes it has to be some form of reputation building, connections building, making friends, something that makes them at least feel good about themselves, for things that are related to business and money, ideally something that eventually does improve their financial goals, right? Which might not be direct things, right, but could just be, again, like improving odds of serendipitous chance encounters and so on. So that's an important one. I think, maybe I'll mention something about the one-time fee thing, because look, people ask me about all the time, like, do I think one-time fee or the recurring fee is the best thing? I wish I knew the answer, and I wish I could run two experiments side by side, because I don't know, to be honest. Maybe I could have made more money charging yearly or some other recurring things. I honestly don't know. I of course, the reason I'm stuck with the one-time fees because I think it's better financially for me to do one-time fee. But I think the fundamental reason is because I realize this a lot with communities. That is that I notice that a lot with my members, that sometimes people disappear for a long period of time, like for 6 months, a year, even multiple years, and many times they come back, and usually there's like, oh, I was busy, or we just had a baby, and I couldn't think about anything else, or at work I got promoted, or I got laid off, and I was some life event changes, and I'm pretty certain all these people, where life gets in the way, would almost certainly have cancelled if this was a recurring fee, whether it was yearly or monthly. They say, oh, I don't have time for this, even if they enjoyed it, right? And once they churn usually, right? In theory they could come back, but usually they're not your customers anymore. If I'm emailing all my members, they're not going to be in my email list because they told me, hey, I'm done, I don't want to hear from you again, basically by canceling. So the one-time commitment, the one-time fee makes it a bit Hotel California, right? You can check out, but you can never really leave. Right? If you join the small business community, that unless you ask for a refund, right? I mean, which I let people do, right? You're always going to be my member, and this becomes a bit of a gift that keeps on giving. Like, people never really feel that, they're underutilizing it, because there's always the option that they can use it later. And I basically, nowadays, so my customer acquisition initially has been my audience primarily. Nowadays, it's much more word of mouth. The people who are joining many of them don't even know me, right? They join because someone tells them, someone who's already a member tells them, hey, you should consider joining, and they join. So it's very hard to get word of mouth work for you if you have a lot of churn, for example, right? And right now I feel like I get a lot of word of mouth from people who are not active anymore just because they're busy, but they remember that they were active and they consider themselves still members. And occasionally, like every month or so, I send people an email with like a digest of what happened and new events and things like that, and just keeps things top of mind, that they remember they're still a member and they can join. So that's I think another thing to consider. Maybe again, I don't want to give the impression that I know for certain that one-time fees are the best thing, right? But I certainly think they're underrated, because of course, people feel like community is something you keep getting value from, and definitely, so maybe the best thing to do is pay one time. But I think if you think, in terms of lifetime value, even with a subscription-based business, there's always an average customer lifetime value, because churn is always there. So you might be in a situation where you might be able to collect all the lifetime value, or maybe even higher than the lifetime value, completely upfront. That now your members they don't get to see that annoying recurring fee in their statement. They're never going to leave, right? They're always going to feel part of the community, right? And I think usually it's much more conducive to better satisfaction. So, to answer the question, I think it's mostly what we talked about before. That is like trying to figure out what's in it for the members, right, to participate, and maybe in pricing. I think it's another interesting aspect to consider as well, because look, I've seen many communities have like a 32% monthly churn or something like that are charging monthly, right? Which is not surprising when you think about it. Like, people join, they see the charge on their statements 3 times, they feel, oh, I'm not really logging in, why am I paying for this? And they cancel. And that's very unfortunate that you fight hard to persuade someone to join and then they leave after 2 months. It's not nice.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, because regardless of how much value you have gotten from this overall, it's not how our brains work as consumers.
It's about the future, exactly. Yeah,
It's about the future, and it's also like
yeah,
almost every month it just restarts.
yeah.
So it's
You
like
start
if
exactly. You evaluate. Absolutely.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
So in January, I get a ton of value from this, $150 a month course. I'm like, oh, this is excellent. This is great. But then in February, it's like, all right, now I'm back
Yeah.
to zero. And if February, I don't get that much, even if I got 5 months worth of value in January, my brain is like, oh, well, this thing isn't really getting me anything anymore.
Exactly.
And then as you're saying, every payment that I see is yet another reminder of like, how do you really want to stay in this thing? And lo and behold, when you have no extra payments, that question never enters the mind. I didn't quite think about it that way.
Yeah.
And it's hard to quantify goodwill. Like,
it is hard. Yeah.
I'm sure you could get some master CFO to put a brilliant spreadsheet together, but I mean, as you've mentioned throughout this conversation, you've helped people build friendships, build collaborations, build their client list, help other people maybe find co-founders for their own small bet. And I don't know how much you're tracking, but I bet it could get quite complicated to track.
It's
not
hard
just
to
referrals.
track. No,
but
absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's other things as well that are even less concrete, like it's just feeling good, right? It's we have a lot, for example, and maybe this is something I'll mention as well. There's a mistake I did with my first Discord server where I tried to keep the group chat very much on topic, where I was in charge of creating the channels, and people used to ask me, shall we have a books channel or about other things that are not necessarily related to business? And I used to say no, primarily for two reasons. I didn't want to have a very long list of channels where most of them are empty or low activity, and I wanted to keep it very much on topic. So recently we moved to a new platform called Campfire. It's a bit of a niche chat system. And by default, Campfire comes with, allows anyone to create channels. So suddenly I wasn't in charge anymore. And people were creating all sorts of weird things when I started the beta, like, health and fitness and love and relationships and cat photos and food. What did you have for breakfast? What books are you reading? And initially I was thinking, oh God, like what I'm going to do with this. But then I started to realize like that this again, just to show how sometimes, like random things that are not by design, these kinds of very casual channels not only became some of the most popular and most active channels, but this is what was bringing people back, right? Because, for example, we have a fitness channel, and people come in and they share their personal best, or they share their questions, or they talk about, their favorite protein bars or whatever. And they don't really have any place to talk about these things, right? I mean, because they're not going to go on Twitter, jump into someone else's conversation. Maybe, that's something that their friends or colleagues talk about. Right? So it's the place where there's a small group of people. That's why we're talking about fitness stuff. One of the most popular rooms we have is one called Fatherhood, which initially I thought was a bit, again, like probably, just calling it Fatherhood, not like parenthood. Probably if I were creating the room, I would try to be more inclusive, right? But whoever created it just created it Fatherhood, and it just allowed a space for a group of a few hundred dads to come in with all the challenges of parenting and family life and so on and so forth, completely unrelated to the main stuff of the small bets community is entrepreneurship. Actually, it's not even completely unrelated because lifestyle is always a factor, right? So there's still a little bit on a tangent, but there are things that are certainly completely unrelated. Like, for example, we have a cat's photo channel. What's funny about it is that what ends up happening is, like, someone who has a cat, they might see their cat in a cute position, funny position, whatever, and they take a photo and they think, let me go and share it in this small bets campfire. And they log in and they see that maybe they have a mention that they haven't read, and there's something happening in the marketing channel and the other things, and they remember, it becomes top of mind. The same thing, we have a food channel. You make a nice breakfast, you put it on your plate, you take a photo. Oh, let me go share it with my friends in the small bets community. It's very fascinating, right? How sometimes these casual things, right, can help bring people together. So this was another, again, very much by accident, not just by accident, but I almost resisted it in the beginning, and it's now really paying off. And I think it's one of those things that just making people come back and remember. So
well, and it
pretty,
also
pretty
really hits the goal that you mentioned earlier, where a big thing to incentivize engagement is giving people
Make them feel-
opportunities
yeah.
to be their own expert, or to share their own expertise, or something where maybe I don't know a ton about marketing, but like, hey, I know, I like, I've been a dad for 10 years, and when I talk about fatherhood, I feel it makes me feel important and like an expert,
good,
and I have
exactly.
some value to share.
Exactly. So just probably, like, if you were to distill the emotions, like making people feel good that they're participating, right? So yeah, in some of these channels is very much, there's nothing financial. It's like I think it's something probably in our DNA for most people, right? That we get satisfaction from being helpful. So if there's the right channels and the right places, right, people will express that. So that was very interesting. This is literally a lesson like that I learned in the last, not even a year, like the last 8 months or so, since I made sort of this move to a different platform. And now we do have a very, very long list of rooms, right? And I don't think it's hurting me. Some of them are not very active, right? But we sort them by activity. But that sort of worry that I had that there's going to be lots of things that are not very active, still not a problem. There are things that are niche, but when something gets posted there, there's going to be always those people who are in this group, like that, they jump in and chime in and comment and so on. So
long as there's not a things we hate about Daniel room.
Yes.
Maybe. Or maybe that would be the most, who knows, maybe that's
a popular
the most
one. Yeah, well, I'll have to leave it.
Man, the last thing I wanted to ask you about was one of the more recent small bets that you yourself have made as an entrepreneur, which is, I don't even know if there's a short name for it, but you have sold to Small Bets members, or to your audience, I don't know exactly the avatar, but you've sold your calendar link for people to just set up a call with you whenever they want, and forever if they choose. Can you please tell me about why you started that and how that has been going for you?
Very interesting. So this was a bit of an evolution. This was also something that evolved from the small bets community, right? At one point, probably about a couple of years ago, on a whim, I opened my Calendly and I, selected, 20 spots, and I sent a link into our group chat and say, hey, anyone who wants to do a 30-minute one-on-one with me, feel free. And it was, I talked with 20, what did it call them? I mean, somewhat strangers, right? Because I didn't know these people, but were members in the community. And I felt that it was very valuable to them, right? I mean, the kinds of feedback I got, right? It felt really genuine, like that whatever, I was able to help them with something. They came with questions and they knew me, right? They self-selected the questions because they knew what I might be able to help them with. Like, they didn't come ask me for dating advice. Like, they asked me about, how to start a community or a course, or, things that they knew I had some experience with. That was my first time I was thinking there's something about this, and I contemplated for a long time how to productize it. I was thinking of like creating some piece of software that helps organize one-on-ones with other different members and so on. So a couple of years pass and I create another cohort course. I didn't do this for a long time. I did only 3 versions of it. This was a bit of a cohort course, but with very high touch. So it was a mix of cohort course and coaching for people who wanted to create information products. So people who wanted to create mostly books and recorded self-directed courses. That's how to start with some knowledge in your head to a product on the market and get it done. So this was a 4-week program, but it wasn't just a course, right? They were like giving me, pitching the ideas, giving them feedback, and basically hand holding them all the way to the process. And a problem I had with this program was that, very few people were getting to the finish line. So again, I think I was booking seats of 25 people, and maybe only 3 or 4 people actually produced a product at the end. I was feeling a bit bad about it. And almost everyone started, but for reasons, again, life gets in the way, they get busy, they get demotivated, and so on and so forth. Not everyone managed to get to the end. And for this one, I was charging, $1,500, so it was quite a higher price, right? And I wanted people to feel satisfied with what they got. So a little bit of a reaction to this realization, right, that there were a big chunk of people who didn't get to the finish line. I offered everyone, hey, here's my Calendly, and feel free to book meetings with me, book calls with me until you get to the end. I'm going to help you. And I told them, hey, it could be tomorrow, it could be in a year, it could be whenever, right? Whenever, you're back, get back to it, I'll be there and I can help you. And the response to this was also very fascinating. And 2 things I realized. Again, first of all, that I felt like these one-on-one calls were probably much more helpful than everything I did in that program. The cohort calls, the written feedback, just this 30-minute meeting with people just gave them much more motivation, much more guidance, and it felt like a better use of everyone's time, honestly, like the one-on-one personalized coaching / consulting. So this was another one thing. And also I realized that people weren't abusing this, even though they had access to my calendar indefinitely. They could have booked a slot every single day. Right? I started to realize, actually, they only booked calls when they really needed some help. Right? They were about to launch something, and they wanted me to review it, or they got stuck, or they didn't know how to think about something. Right? They came with something very concrete that most of the times I was able to help them with it. So this started to make me think like that maybe this is the model that I should consider. Like I was again tempted to, and the reason I started it was the responding to another stressor that I described earlier, that in the small best community, that original format of the value proposition being the menu of live classes was getting less attention. So I was trying to think like, what should I do next? Like, what should I try? I should try a new experiment. And this kept coming to mind. I just, for a while, I just couldn't find the right business model. Right? I mean, how do I charge? Do I charge per session? Do I charge per hour? Do I let people buy 10 sessions? And all these things that I could think of, they all seem to have like a non-desirable, like if I put a time limit or I put a session limit, an undesirable thing, even for me. For example, if I were charging per session, it would put a lot of pressure even on me, right, to be very valuable in that one session, because people have paid a lot of money for the 1 hour session. I want to make sure that this just can't be casual, right? I want to make sure that every single session they get something concrete. And do I really want that pressure, right? And if it was something that they pay per month or per year as well, there's going to be the issue that people are always going to feel like time is running out. I'm underutilizing this thing that I paid for. Right? This is suboptimal. Probably I felt like it would be hard to convince them to buy into this thing. So going back to the one-time model, I thought one-time payment model. I thought like, and to the experience before with the info product course, that people might not abuse this. I said, what if I just charge people a one-time fee and they get access to my Calendly and they could call me whenever they want, which sounds crazy when you speak like this, because again, I mean, when I tell people about it, it seems like life for abuse. But I think this is very similar. Like here in the United States, maybe people won't appreciate this, but pretty much everywhere in the world, right? For example, most people have universal healthcare, free healthcare. You could go to your doctor whenever you want. You could go to the hospital whenever you want for free. Nobody will charge you anything. I grew up in a country that has this crazy. But it turns out people don't just wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm going to go to the doctor. I'm going to go to the doctor every day. Why? Because they're wasting their time as well. right? Even though it's free and they could go to the emergency room every day just to, for every time they have a headache or whatever, they don't go because it's useless, right? It's a waste of time for themselves. There's a symmetry, right? And I think this is what makes this program sustainable, is that people don't want to be on a Zoom call with me for an hour talking about the weather or whatever. They're only going to be booking a call because they feel I could help them. They're also not going to very likely, again, bring topics that chances are I'm not be helpful with, right? If they want to scale some e-commerce business to $1 billion, I have no experience with that, right? They know what I have experience with, so probably if they had that problem, they're not going to come with me. And
Daniel,
I
I'm
also
trying
think
to
that
find the perfect hairstyle. What do you recommend?
yes, exactly. Yeah, that's certainly something. Well, I mean, I can offer one, the clean shave. I can offer the pros for that. Um, so, and also my knowledge, I think, has a limit as well. I also feel like there's after a few sessions, and this is what I felt with the info product group, that at one point after 5 or 6 sessions, I pretty much told you everything that I know, right? I mean, I've taught the men how to fish, basically, right? There's sure there might be calls in the future, maybe as a follow-up or brainstorm something or whatever, but the bulk tends to happen in a few calls. Here's my systems, here's how I think about things, here's how I dealt with those things, and after a few sessions. So basically, this business model is a bit of an actuarial model where there's going to be there's a bell curve distribution. That's, that now I have a bit over 100 people who signed up over this, which, by the way, to answer the other question, is going really well. I've made over $200,000 with this in these last 7 something months. And I'm at a stage now where I'm taking about 3 calls a day, 4 times a week, right? It's a bit skewed in the beginning, like when I announce a new badge, there's a bit more, and I open up a few more slots. But that's sort of how it's happening right now. And I'm already noticing, right, that the people who I signed up 7 months ago, many of them they're not booking calls anymore, right? And the average call per user is about 2.8 so far. I know it will increase in the future because this is an indefinite thing, right? But in the 8 or so months that I've running it, there's a bell curve, right, of some people with whom I've only had like 1 call or 2 calls, right? Maybe the average is about 4. The average is actually 2.8 something, right? And there's a few with whom I had like 4 or 5. There's maybe 1 or 2 people with whom I had like 10 calls because they really needed some hand holding with something. But those are very rare. But the business here is like, you want the average to continue to make sense. Like the average still makes it such that right now my hourly rate is still about $800 something per hour. It will diminish over time, I'm cognizant, but I'm very optimistic that it probably won't drop below $500 an hour based on my extrapolation of how things are going. Time will tell, maybe I'm wrong, but fundamentally, this I think what usually convinces people is that I doubt people are going to be calling me, 3 years from now and they maybe a few of them might say, hey, something happened. I know I booked this thing with you, and maybe I'm making a big career change. I wanted to hear from you if I'm making a silly mistake or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm completely fine with that. I would have taken that call even if people haven't paid me, right? I mean, if someone wants to check with me, right, if there's something very serious or something I can be helpful with, so I wouldn't mind taking those, but the frequency will almost certainly diminish, right, to be almost 0, right? So again, like time will tell here whether this is something that is sustainable, that can work indefinitely, and so on and so forth. But I think it's an interesting business model. So basically, the pricing here, I was charged, my price is $2,500, and people can choose to pay in 4 monthly installments as well, right? So it makes it a bit easier to pay, no interest, right? So $625 per month for 4 months, and they get access to my Calendly indefinitely, right? And there's a list of things, right, that I say I think I can help with, but actually I let people I tell people that use me as a resource. Anything you think I can be helpful with, even if it's not in the list. If you think I could be of any assistance, and the kind of things that we do is like I review marketing copy, right? We discuss, do market research together. It's probably maybe a third of my sessions are of that kind. A lot of them are also like color change brainstorming, like people have a high paying job but they're unsatisfied, they're thinking about what to do next, how to prepare, right, and so on and so forth. I have a big chunk that is also technical sessions, right, that sort of using a bit of my background, right? They're migrating their software from some old version to new version. They want to try to do it in a way that is like not disruptive to their customers, and so on and so forth. And mostly it's just variations of these three types of categories of things that the sessions are of. So a little bit, I haven't really shared this publicly much. I talked about it in my community. A little bit of my vision here, actually, and I don't know if this will happen or not. But I'd like to create a package, again, where it's not just me offering these, but because I have connections with maybe, 10 people or so who have expertise in other things that I have no expertise in. A little bit like I was doing within the small bus community until recently with the classes, where instead of just signing up for my help, right, you sign up for something that includes 10 people. Now, very likely the pricing is going to have to be different here. Chances are this will require to be a recurring charge, especially because I can't guarantee that the group of 10 people will continue to be the same. What if one of those people decides I don't want to do this anymore? I mean, it's hard to have charged someone with the promise that they're going to be available. So I think I would have to charge monthly, for example, such that if someone leaves, I mean, you always have the option of canceling next month, right? So no promise has been broken. But I think this would be valuable for me, for example. I think I would pay something, I pay my accountant $600 a month just to take care of my taxes. Was it just
To
one
yell at you.
specialty? To yell at you, basically. Yes, to yell at me. I would probably pay $500 a month if I had a group of 10 experts, right, on speed dial, that I have the option, right, that if I needed help with something, I could call these people. And I know that if I stop paying, I will lose my spot. Right? That's a bit of the motivation to continue to be on their retainer. And so this is a bit of an idea that I'm exploring right now. Right? And I think this experience of me running it on my own is helping me understand the processes. Nothing super sophisticated here. I just do this with just Zoom and Calendly. But for example, with note taking, now I'm getting these like AI notes transcripts, because sometimes, there's people who, I speak infrequently with, and I need to remember where we left off, and so on and so forth. So I did organize myself well. This experience is helping me. But maybe this will be the evolution that comes out of this, right? Something that is just not just me, right? But a consultation coaching package, right? That involves 5 to 10 people, maybe, right? Some group like that. But we'll see. It's something brewing in my head. maybe it will be done, maybe not.
I love that idea, man. Yeah, and it's a fascinating model. And when I've shared it with other people, the reaction is always the same. It's like, that sounds terrifying. What if someone just completely abuses?
Calls me every day.
Every single, hey, Daniel, I need to know what shoes I should wear today.
There's another thing that, I could also tell people, I've never done this before. I've offered it to a couple of people, not because they've abused it, but because I felt like I couldn't help them. I could always tell people, hey, I could give you your money back. This is not working out. There were a couple of people who needed things that I felt like I didn't have experience with. And in the first call, I told them, look, I really don't have knowledge in that field. But, with these people, we still found things that I was able to help them with anyway. So they remained. But basically, in the back of my mind, if someone becomes annoying or takes too much time or expecting, I tell them, hey, here's your money back. And that's it, right? Fired your client, basically. So there's always that option, right, that I think minimizes the downside of abuse very, very radically. So now it becomes of like, what if someone abuses it like years from now, right? But then I think we're getting into the margins um, of
Sure.
risk, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah, man. Well, look, we just did 2 hours. I
cool.
absolutely
Yeah.
loved this conversation, and I can't thank you enough for your time.
Yeah.
I got a lot out of this, and I'm excited to re-listen to it. I will leave links to the Small Bets community, to your Twitter or X account. Is there anything else that you'd like to share
No,
with?
those are the main places. Yeah. No.
Cool.
Yeah, that's good.
Awesome. Well, dude, you're the man. I love what you're doing. I take a lot of inspiration from you in how I build my own stuff, and thrilled to continue to see what you build next. So, man, thank you for today, and
Dylan,
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. No, great meeting you, Dylan. Thank you for this.